legal but troubling, trying to shape immigration laws to pad their bottom lines.
They are clearly interested in expanding this growth.
Andrea Black leads the Detention Watch Network, a coalition of immigrant advocacy groups.
Private prison companies may be following immigration law, a federal immigration law, but it's a law that they've actually heavily influenced.
She cites records showing CCA has spent nearly $19 million lobbying federal officials on a host of issues, much of it directed at agencies that oversee immigration policy. CCA declined our requests for an interview. The company staunchly denies it lobbies policymakers on immigration enforcement or sentencing laws. Which is not to say CCA isn't paying attention to the raging immigration debate. This is Arizona, home of one of the toughest and most controversial immigration laws in the nation.
The law is unconstitutional.
Senate Bill 1070, a measure that grants law enforcement expanded powers to check people's immigration status.
Am I going to get pulled over because I'm brown? Am I going to get pulled over because I'm Mexican?
We have an invasion going on in this country that is about to destroy this republic.
This is the bill's chief sponsor, Senate President Russell Pierce. He's a supporter of private prison companies, and they are a supporter of him.
You've taken campaign contributions from some of these companies. Do you feel that that's appropriate?
Well, because I worked hard on Arizona privatization issues. I'm a privatization guy. I'm a free market guy.
It kind of opens you up, though, to questions like this, doesn't it?
But it shouldn't, because if people look at my history, I've been consistent probably from the time I was a toddler.
To be sure, Pierce had been pushing a crackdown on illegal immigration for years.
I will now sign Senate Bill 1070.
But finally turning SB 1070 into law took some help. And that came from an organization in Washington called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. While not officially a lobbying group, ALEC says it provides the private sector with an unparalleled opportunity to have its voice heard by state lawmakers. In 2009, Russell Pierce brought his bill to a task force at ALEC that focuses on crime and immigration. The members agreed to promote his bill and help get other state legislators on board. Among the members of that task force, CCA.
We saw that CCA was given the ability to talk directly with state legislatures in Arizona, and they actually helped present a model piece of legislation, which later was presented almost word for word on the State House floor.
CCA, a member of ALEC for more than a decade, says it only listened as state lawmakers discussed policy. But several public interest groups say corporate members of ALEC would only have one reason to be there: to help guide the agenda.
You sit on a committee with the representative of CCA.
Yeah.
And you've never
Lots
had a conversation with them about this.
No, not in drafting or writing this. I've never had a conversation with them on this bill. You know, before it being adopted. I mean, they were supportive, you know, but it had nothing to do with them.
ALEC, the policy group, says there's nothing wrong with bringing lawmakers and corporations together. Reagan Weber was the spokesperson for ALEC when we visited their offices.
So it's back when these private prison industry forces had a seat at the table in making these policies. Was that proper?
Well, let me ask you this. If you're going to do education reform, when you want educators sitting at the table? So likewise, ALEC believes that anybody that legislators intend to regulate, they should have a conversation with, and we facilitate that conversation. We simply present a policy position, and there are plenty of organizations that do the same thing.
Far from Washington, here on the Mexican border,
Can we get somebody with a cage right over here?
where policy meets reality, there is plenty at stake: lives, freedom, and money. The amount the U.S. government spends on immigration detention, $1.8 billion a year and counting. Up next, guess who raised your dinner, built your boat, all behind bars, $2.5 billion in sales. Putting the career in career criminal when we return. In the high desert of southern Colorado, Canyon City is an oasis of American industry. home to a sprawling 6,000-acre complex with 50 businesses generating $56 million a year in revenue. There's a goat farm, a vineyard, workers building motorcycles and canoes. There's a florist and a tilapia fish farm. All of these industries are overseen by self-proclaimed risk-taker Steve Smith.
I'm willing to take a lot of chances. What I try to do is bring things back to the United States and make opportunities for businesses inside.
And when Smith says inside, he means inside, because all of those businesses are staffed by inmates. Smith is director of Colorado Correctional Industries. It's a division of the State Department of Corrections with a mission to save money for the taxpayers while helping rehabilitate Colorado's inmates.
We're training for a work ethic. We're training that they get self-respect. We're training that we're giving them something that they can take to a prospective employer and say that I do this.
Putting prisoners to work is nothing new. And even today, prisoners still make license plates. But now, prison labor has become a huge moneymaker. $2.6 billion in sales nationwide in 2010 alone. Governments and private prison companies are using that money to offset their expenses. There's papaya puree made by prisoners in Hawaii, jeans from Oregon, waterbeds from Nevada, balloons from Kansas, floor tiles from South Carolina. Even components of Patriot missiles have been made by inmates. In the Canyon City Correctional Complex, Hector Sanchez, serving a 26-year sentence for assault, appreciates the opportunity to work.
Throughout my time in prison, I've achieved a lot. Working for the fish industry now for 6.5 years.
But some feel the prison business is muscling out traditional business.
We were the ones that built the customers, too.
Irwin Young started raising tilapia decades ago. He thought he had cornered the market until Colorado Correctional Industries got involved.
There was all of a sudden larger, more attractive fish at a cheaper price. It wrecked our business.
I did not put him out of business. I got out of his market once I found out that it was bothering him, and we specifically said that we would not sell live fish in Colorado.
But Young says the damage was already done by a competitor with access to cheap labor and facilities. The tilapia business in prison, meanwhile, is thriving.
Well, when we got into the tilapia business, we looked for a niche. And whenever I do a business plan, we do a lot of research and find out. Our niche was hormone-free tilapia.
The inmates raise the fish and process them into fillets, which are sold at Whole Foods in Colorado. In fiscal 2010, the tilapia business brought in close to $1.5 million in revenue for Colorado Correctional Industries.
Here I'm earning a good wage. So of all of us on an hourly basis, it's a profitable business. I don't know why anybody else hasn't thought of the idea.
But along with the potential to generate billions in revenue using prison labor comes concerns.
The most important thing that's wrong with it is that it takes jobs away from people on the outside.
Gordon Lafer, a professor at the University of Oregon's Labor Education and Research Center, has studied the impact of prison labor on American workers.
Why shouldn't we be putting these people to work making things?
The same things that make people concerned about the ways that China or Vietnam or wherever the cheapest labor in the world is can undercut American jobs are the exact same dynamics for prison workers.
Across the country, prison jobs can pay as little as 2 cents an hour. But if a product crosses state lines, federal law requires that inmates make at least minimum wage. And no matter what the pay, inmates may not see all of it. Some of their earnings may go toward restitution or cost of incarceration. In Colorado, most inmates earn a base pay of 60 cents for working a full 8-hour day, with the potential for incentive bonuses of around $5 a day.
Incentive is based on production, so it encourages them to come to work every day to make more money.
For being locked up, they pay us decent.
Greg Richmond is serving an 11-year sentence for vehicular homicide.
If you work, they take care of you, and if you don't, well, then you stay at the bottom.
Here in Canyon City, they're constantly looking for new ideas, like this dog boarding and training business.
Dogs on the inside, circle up.
The dogs, sold to the public for $500 apiece, are trained and cared for by inmates.
Ah, good boy. It gives you confidence, it gives you patience, it gives you all kinds of stuff. I mean, it teaches you how to feel again. Brisky, sit.
Jason Mayo is serving a 48-year sentence for murder.
Good job, good down. Who would have thought I'd come to prison and find out that I love training dogs and that's what I want to do for the rest of my life?
When you get a chance to do something like this, we're the ones getting the best out of the whole thing.
They learn to get up every morning, go to work, and at the end of the day, they get a paycheck just like on the streets.
Smith says programs like this benefit taxpayers as well as inmates.
For every inmate that works for Correctional Industries, we save the taxpayer $5,000 because they would have to have either a correctional officer or have other programs being paid for out of the general fund.
And, says Smith, using inmate labor on the inside ultimately benefits those on the outside.
It's either you pay me now or pay me later. We need to train these people. We need to get them back on the streets as good quality citizens that are going to be productive, and that's what we're all about.
Up next, they built it, but no one came.
This was going to be a big boon for this area, and it's turned out to be a whole lot different.
That's an understatement.
Prison boom and bust when Billions Behind Bars returns. Who would want to look out their window and see this? Razor wire, guard towers, inmates. Turns out a prison can be a good neighbor. In Fremont County, Colorado, more than half the jobs come from the state's prison complex.
Good, good.
The largest private employer in Pinal County, Arizona, Corrections Corporation of America, CCA, which owns 6 facilities, pumping $140 million a year in salaries and benefits into the local economy. And across the country, 26 new jobs are created for every 100 inmates. Which is what they were counting on in Hardin, Montana, where longtime resident Bill Joseph sits on the board of the local Economic Development Authority.
A lot of small towns in the West are drying up, and those of us who are left are doing anything we can to stay alive.
No stranger to hard times, Hardin is one of the poorest communities in America. The Two Rivers Detention Facility was supposed to turn everything around.
Not that we were wanting to have a prison in our backyard, but it was made for economic development.
It didn't work out so well.
It's a turnkey operation.
Jeff McDowell, the executive director of the Two Rivers Authority, took us on a tour of the facility.
This is part of the intake. Flip-flops for the showers.
It's ready to go.
Boxers.
Fully stocked.
2-piece uniform, a top.
But there is something missing.
Just needs a staff and prisoners.
That's right. Since Two Rivers was completed in 2007, it has never housed a single prisoner.
This was going to be a big boon for Hardin, and it's turned out to be a whole lot different, hasn't it?
That's an understatement.
To understand what went wrong in Hardin is to understand why the promise of big money in the prison business can be riddled with pitfalls.
I think it's a mistake for any community to pin its long-term economic hopes on the existence of a prison.
Martin Horn spent years running corrections departments.
If you're in one of these smaller communities, though, and you know, traditional industry is tough to come by, this may be something that could be a ticket out of the economic difficulties.
Yes, that's right. But they ought to pay close attention to the reality of the economic benefit, that it may not be as great as is claimed.
Bill Joseph believes Hardin was left high and dry. But like any investor who's made a bad bet, Hardin may also have itself to blame. It started in 2004 when this man came to town. James Parkey is